You take a breath and you don't think about it. In, out, thousands of times a day, completely automatic. But somewhere in human history, someone took a very different kind of breath, one filled with smoke. And the real story of when that happened is far stranger than a campfire accident. Fire itself is old, older than modern humans, older than language, older than most of what you'd call civilization. Your ancestors controlled fire for warmth, for cooking, for keeping predators at bay through the dark. But controlling fire and inhaling its smoke on purpose are two very different things. So when did that shift happen? Archaeologist Will Roebuck has spent years studying the earliest evidence of controlled fire use, and his research points to something surprising. Hominins were tending hearths as far back as roughly 400,000 years ago. That's fire as a tool, fire as a survival strategy, not yet fire as something breathed in for its own sake. Smoke inhalation likely started long before anyone called it smoking. Think about it. Every early human who sat near a fire for warmth was breathing smoke. Every person who slept in a cave with a hearth burning through the night was inhaling it for hours. This wasn't a choice. It was simply what fire cost you. And that cost was real. Researchers studying ancient skeletal remains have found signs consistent with chronic respiratory stress in populations that lived in enclosed, poorly ventilated spaces near fire. Caves trap smoke. Smoke fills lungs. Your ancestors paid a price for warmth long before anyone understood what smoke was doing to their bodies. But breathing smoke by accident is not the same as seeking it out. The deliberate use of smoke on purpose for a reason beyond warmth appears to be much younger. Evidence for intentional plant burning for its effects reaches back at least several thousand years, and likely further than written records can confirm. Early humans noticed something. Certain plants, when burned, changed how people felt. Calmer, lighter, sometimes altered in ways that felt important, even sacred. This is where smoke stops being an accident and starts becoming a ritual. Anthropologist Wade Davis has spent decades studying how different cultures used plants not just for food or medicine, but for altered states of consciousness. His work highlights something the modern world often forgets. For many ancient societies, smoke wasn't just smoke. It was a bridge, a way to communicate with ancestors, with spirits, with something beyond the everyday. Archaeological evidence from South America shows tobacco use dating back thousands of years, tied closely to ritual and ceremony rather than casual habit. In North America, similar patterns emerge: pipes carved from stone, smoke used in councils, in healing, in marking important moments. This wasn't recreational. It was structural. Smoke held meaning. Here's the part that might surprise you. For most of human history, smoking, in the sense you'd recognize it today, was rare, ceremonial, and deeply tied to specific plants in specific regions. It was not an everyday habit. It was closer to a sacred technology, something reserved for moments that mattered. That changed dramatically and recently in evolutionary terms. When tobacco spread globally after European contact with the Americas, something ancient and ceremonial got stripped of its context. What was once a ritual practiced occasionally, often under specific social rules, became a commercial product consumed constantly, by anyone, anywhere. The plant didn't change much. The relationship humans had with it changed completely, and your body still carries the marks of that shift. The receptors in your brain that respond to nicotine weren't built for cigarettes. They existed long before tobacco use was common, tied to broader systems involving attention, stress response, and reward. Nicotine happens to fit into that system almost too well, hijacking pathways that originally rewarded things like finding food or successfully avoiding danger. This is why quitting is so hard. You're not fighting a modern invention. You're fighting an ancient reward system that has been redirected. Psychologist and researcher Kent Berridge, known for his work on the neuroscience of craving, has shown that wanting something and liking something are controlled by partly separate systems in the brain. Addiction often exploits the wanting system far more than the liking one. You don't need to enjoy a cigarette to crave it intensely. Your brain just needs to have learned that it's worth reaching for. So when did ancient humans start smoking? The honest answer has layers. Involuntary smoke exposure goes back hundreds of thousands of years, an unavoidable cost of controlling fire. Deliberate ritual use of burned plants goes back thousands of years, tightly wrapped in ceremony and meaning. And the version of smoking you might picture today, casual, constant, disconnected from ritual, is only a few centuries old. What looks like one continuous habit is actually three very different stories stacked on top of each other. Which means the next time you see smoke curling up from anything, a candle, a fire pit, a distant chimney, you're looking at something with a much longer and stranger history than it seems. Not one invention, not one moment. A slow, layered relationship between humans and fire that started with survival, became sacred, and eventually became something else entirely. You take a breath, and you don't think about it. But somewhere behind that breath is a hearth from 400,000 years ago, a ceremony from thousands of years ago, and a habit that's barely a few hundred years old, all breathing through you at once.